Good afternoon, everybody. Are we ready to start? Okay, well, my name's Dominic Richardson. I'm chairing this session on Families, Healthy Lives and Sustainable Future, our panel discussion in observance of the International Day of the Family. I work for UNICEF. I'm a senior education specialist, but I have a long history of working in family policy in OECD countries. And for me, this is a great honor to be able to chair this session, and I'm looking forward to fascinating presentations and excellent input from everybody. So today we're celebrating the International Day of Families a little bit early. It falls on the 15th of May, on Sunday. We know that in many countries around the world they're going to be celebrating on Sunday. We know there's picnics organised and sporting festivals. We're not having a picnic or a sporting festival. We're here to mark the occasion officially with the annual gathering here at the United Nations. And it's great to see a room full of people ready to talk about this important topic. This truly is an international gathering and an international organisation for an international issue. We have experts in this room from every region of the world. And what we're going to focus on is the Sustainable Development Goal number 3. And but we don't just want to focus on health and well-being. We understand that health and well-being is going to impact and influenced by the other goals that are also influential for the family and influenced by the family. So we'll like to go a little bit beyond this, 1 to 5 for sure. Though certainly if you were to look at the education SDG, you'll see that list of targets peppered with the word children, for instance. In fact, you see children, men and women, girls and women, all across these targets. But we're not just going to talk about the well-being of children. We want to talk about the well-being of youth and adults and even older adults, all types of family members. Now, we're interested in not only how family policies can help all nations of the world get to these goals within what is a reasonably short period of time, at 14 years now, but we're also interested in how these goals will influence the family environment, and we're also interested in how families themselves can contribute to this important change. This morning, we already had an excellent discussion and presentation with the experts around the table, and I had some thoughts from that that I thought might be worth sharing, and I think it gives us some notes on which we can continue our discussions. Across these targets within these goals, we see very directly references and mentions to the family. Well, you can't talk about family planning without an idea of what the family is. And you can't talk about family farming without an idea of what the family is. But we talk about children and units, people together. And there's also indirect references to the family. If we're to reduce the number of deaths caused by hazardous work, for instance, we're saving mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, and so on. So there's also, it touches indirectly very much on our issue. My second point is that the SDGs are not just a big challenge, but there's a lot of them. We have 17 goals and 169 targets. And as with any list of targets, we like to juxtapose them, put them next to each other, and pretend that they're independent of each other when they're not. They're all interlinked. And that makes them quite complex. It makes them complex because their interactions can sometimes be good. Good health in early childhood makes education easier to achieve. Good education makes productivity easier to achieve. But they can also be linked in more complex and sometimes not so happy ways. For instance, if we were to take a country with high income inequality and introduce a universal childcare system, you would find the income inequality just continues to increase. Richer parents will take the childcare and earn more money, and poorer parents will take the childcare and earn less money. And that will affect indicators 1, 2, and 3. It's going to affect our poverty risks. So we need to be aware of complementarities and trade-offs as we strive to meet all of these goals. And the final thing that came up very clear this morning was that context matters. Context matters socially and culturally, where we are in terms of development. How we make the changes, implementation matters, and we talked a bit about that. And we're acutely aware that as we go beyond the stage of finding out conceptually what matters for families, how we go and operationalize this, how we look statistically at what means progress to families. And that's also a big challenge. So, having introduced a lot of challenges, I want to introduce the first of 5 excellent speakers. We have changed the order of the speakers for this session. We're going to start with Rosario. What Rosario will do is speak for about 10 minutes. Then we will open the floor for clarifying questions. That means if you don't understand something, now you ask a question. But if you're interested in it and you want to know more, then I ask that you wait to the end. Where it's about clarification first, okay? So, without further ado, Rosario has the floor to tell us about families, parents, and youth well-being.
Thank you, Daryl, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. And I'm going to present today a paper about families, parent, youth well-being in Latin America. I'm going to be fast in the first part of the presentation because it's a little bit long, so I prefer to go slow in the last part. So, but just to tell you about what is the paper about, is the family. We can start thinking about the family as one of the most important valued institutions in Latin American countries. That's a fact. The World Value Survey says in Latin America, and you can see that it's a very high value. But governments don't invest as much as one would expect according to this value. So these capacities that the family has, and if governments would invest in strengthening family relationships, its stability, communication, and behavioral skills, that would contribute to develop individual and relational capacities. So, and these capacities could have and last and have a positive impact on other areas of well-being and social life. One of the reasons of lack of investment is the different definitions of family, its role in societies, and influence in policy design. Debate often has focused on Catholic nuclear family, which is very different, and we can talk about it for long, discuss about it for long. But it has been, the debate has focused on criticizing or full praise. So it's a debate polarized that doesn't promote the discussion and research and advancing knowledge in this area. Hence, we need to make research and policy concerns address to specific dimensions of it. That debate orients how policy design is made. The objective of the paper is to present a broad view about social and family policies in Latin America and to see whether they address or not family relationships. I'm not going to stop on this forever. I'm going to skip that part. And I'm going to elaborate more about the actual knowledge about Latin American youth, their relationships with parents, and prevalent tendencies on youth policies, whether they consider or not parent-youth relationships. And at the end, some recommendations. So I am going to skip all these parts. If you want to, I can give you... Yes, you can see on the website. No, but not at the end. Let me see. Here. Well, even though most Latin American countries have, as you know, cash transfer programs, and these have been very successful in addressing important problems such as poverty and vulnerability family groups. So, but if we take seriously family issues, they are not as important as we would like to be, or they don't have the impact we would expect. But things are beginning to change. For example, Chile, which has a program, Crece Contigo and Acción en Familia, are examples of good the change that we are starting to see toward explicit family policies. It's what we need. Explicit family policies focused on strengthening relationships and development of capabilities, especially regarding children. Recently, governments have supported two types of programs to promote that parents invest more in their children. Cash transfer programs, as I said, and those aim to change behaviors and practices, as many children still suffer delays in crucial areas of development, in cognitive and language capabilities. If we make an assessment of child development programs, the assessment of the cash transfer programs have shown that monetary transfers have positive but limited research and impact on child's cognitive, language, and behavior development improvements. Seem better explained by changes in the behaviors and not by cash transfers. Instead, rearing and parenting programs have shown promising results. They could change behavior and practices. For example, in Jamaica, Colombia, Brazil, and Chile, rearing practices programs have shown long-term positive outcomes. For example, higher IQ, better results in schools, mental health, less violent behavior, and get better income. They are, though, difficult to implement because they are more qualitative. Well, if we have seen improvements in this area of explicit family policy, they are focused mainly on children or child development in the early years. But in youth programs, we don't see as much progress as we would like to see in family, with a family perspective. For example, the youth programs usually, programs are focused, they are oriented by important concerns, of course, unemployment, deficits in school enrollment, health problems, adolescent pregnancy, and all these things we know. But youth parent or family relationship policies are practically non-existent. Youth programs basically are aimed at promoting and improving their social rights, which is also very important, such as education, economic, civic, and political participation. Most programs are focused on this, guaranteeing social rights. And some include in these social rights support in certain family topics, such as communication, self-esteem, but they are like secondary. So the limitations of these programs are that they are targeted on individuals, and youth usually are understood as adults with no social bonds other than with work, education, political arena, or civic and civil arena, but not with families. When one reads the programs, you see you have the idea that you are in front of a youth or a young person who only moves in work, in school, in politics, in civil society, but doesn't have a family, doesn't have relationships. So human rights, I think, that could be a misunderstanding of human rights and human social rights also. Human rights perspective, I think, implies strengthening relationships of different kind between genders, school participants, but also family members. Hence, the scope of the youth policy should be done not only on improving individual development, but also on relationships themselves. And very little knowledge we have about those relationships in Latin America. One thing that we could rescue is a perspective of the social competence, which is a theoretical framework, and many others can be rescued. But social competence, it's a field of research in Western research, and it's seen as a set of attributes and psychological resources that help youth become adjusted to their social circumstances, native culture, and cope successfully to everyday life and ward off problem behavior. Social competence can promote, and I think this is one of the very valuable things, it can promote a balance between autonomy and connectedness. So it's not that they are individualized or individuals empowered or empowered individuals, they are also connected. I think that's very important. Achievement orientation, for example, social initiative, self-efficacy, academic achievement, and school and work adjustment can be promoted. Attaining psychological and cognitive resources, positive self-esteem, problem-solving capacities, and another important thing is acquiring social skills for interpersonal relationships, conflict management, for example. These aspects of social competence are sources of social and psychological resilience and well-being. In Western research, I'm going to just tell you some of the behaviors that can promote social competence with parents. If parents, well, at least in Western research, in Latin America I think it can be also used, but it has been seen or pointed out that parental support behavior has been associated with the development of virtually all aspects of social competence, because it communicates that youth are valued, confidence on youth abilities, and foster close ties. Parental reasoning is another behavior that is very important and can promote the development of youth social competence. It can foster moral development, internalized responsiveness to parents' expectations, positive self-esteem, and can help youth to develop an autonomous systems of self-affirmed values and expectations. Parental monitoring is also important to promote social competence, and these behaviors has been seen, and I think they are behaviors that are embedded in a comprehensive view of human rights and well-being, I think. So now the negative behaviors that hinder the development of social competence is intrusive psychological behavior, punitive and coercive control, and therefore policies addressed to modify behaviors can promote parents and youth well-being and resilience, but we need more research on these topics. Very rapidly, the recommendations. The first recommendation I think we could say is improving and broadening theoretical frameworks when designing family and youth policies. The second is explicit family and youth policies should be developed, evidence-based on parent-youth relationships and their challenges. Individual youth-targeted policies should be redesigned, considering family perspective and parent-youth relations, and family and youth policies could focus on changing behaviors. And this is a result of other research made and assessment of policies made in child rearing practices. Thank you very much.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Rosario. As I said, we'll open the floor only for any clarifying questions? Oh, no, excellent. Great. So we go from... I like it. You've been very clear. Well, thank you. So we go from one presentation which talks about intergenerational interaction to another, but this time looking at intergenerational transfers and the well-being of older people, delivered by Wendy Wang, a senior researcher from the Pew Center. Are you ready, Wendy?
Yes. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. So I don't have policies in this presentation, and all I have is data, and this data we have collected from the Pew Research Center in the past 7 years in the topic of aging and older adults. Most of the data is about the U.S., but I will touch on some global aging issues in the end, if I have time. Okay, let me start with a basic question. When does old age begin? What are the signs of being old? Is it like someone someone start to have gray hair, or is it like they can't climb up the stairs? Sorry. So we asked this question in a survey in 2009, and we include about 13 benchmarks that someone might get old. And here's the result. So basically, most people consider that age 85 is a marker for old age. Almost 80% people say, someone is old when they turn 85. And then the next popular answer is like if they can't live independently, and then if they can't drive a car, and then that means they're old. So interestingly, if we look at the lower bar, turning 65, this is actually a standard measure we consider someone is old, but only about 32%, which is, less than 1/3 of people say that, turning 65 is a sign that you're old. It's interesting to keep in mind, like, this is what the public thinks. Okay, since the age 65 is not really a marker for old age, and let's take a look, what is the work status of these group of people? And this is data from the same survey in 2009. Among this group of people, 76% are currently not working. They're completely retired out of the labor force. But another 24%, which is almost 1/4 of these group of older adults, are actually in the labor market. They're either working full-time, part-time, or looking for work. Actually, the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the U.S. predicted that the labor force participation of older adults actually is going to continue to rise, and it has been rising since the 1980s, and is going to continue to rise. Okay, let me switch gear, talk about the living arrangement of the older adults. This chart is from a most recent report that we came out about older adults' living arrangement. It shows the share of older adults 65 and older living alone since 1900. So basically, after a steady rise of the share of older adults living alone since 1900, since 1990, which is over 20 years ago, the share has gone down. If we look at the middle line, that's for all. But if we break it down by gender, the story is only about women. So older women today are much less likely to live by themselves than they were in 1990. But for older men, the story is the same. The share is still edging up. One possible explanation is that because men are living longer, so women are more likely to be able to live with their spouse, and so that's why they're less likely to live alone, and they live with their spouse or their children. And so we also had reports in the past showing that there is a return of multi-generational family household in the U.S. since the 80s. Part of the story is more grandparents are living with their grandchildren now. And between 2000 and 2013, the number of grandparents living with their grandchildren in the United States has grown from 5.8 million to 7 million. And we all know that grandparents help with childcare. So actually, in the 7 million grandparents living with their grandchildren, 40% of them are the primary childcare provider, which means that they are in charge of the basic care of the grandkids. Even though actually 60% of them of the household actually have the parents present. Who are these grandparents live with their grandkids? One interesting findings is they are much more racially and ethnically diverse than other older adults in general. This is based on population ages 50 and older. So as we see in the group of grandparents who live with their grandkids, less than half of them are white. But if we look at the 50-plus generation in general, 75% of them are white. And also the share of Hispanics, Blacks, and Asians are much higher in the group of grandparents who live with their grandkids. If I'm talking about living arrangement, I have to address this issue I call the ultimate living arrangement, which is when it comes to a time that if the older person cannot live by themselves, where would they be living? We asked this question in the 2014 survey, and here's what we got. It turned out most people actually want to stay in their own home and have someone to care for them in their own home. And relatively few people say they want to move in assisted living place, and only 4% say they want to move in to nursing home. Okay, so one of the most significant changes in American family today is declining of marriage and and rise of the rise of new family family relationships. So in this context, we asked the question in 2010, asked people to say, to evaluate whether they feel obligated to provide help to different kinds of family members when the family member have a serious problem and need help. Here's what we got. Most people, they have a strong obligation to provide help to their parent or grown children. But if you look at the chart down the line, and when it comes to stepchild, step-parent, and there are relatively fewer people say they have the obligation to provide help. And we also throw in the best friend there, but you know, only 40% of them say they want to help. They feel obligated to help their best friend. So again, blood is thicker than water is really true here. So what kind of transfer is happening between adult children and parents? According to a survey that we did in 2009, 40% of the adult children say they have helped their parents with errands and houseworks in the past 12 months. And relatively fewer of the adult children say they provide help, financial assistance to their parents. On the parents' side, half of them say that they actually have provided financial assistance to their adult children in the past 12 months. And then they also providing childcare. Okay, so I'm going to bring the aging issue to a global context here. As we all know, the world is aging fast. This chart shows the proportion of population ages 65 and older projected for 2050. And we see the chart for overall the world there is 15.6%. So basically, in 2050, about 1 in 6 of the world population will be ages 65 and older. But today, the number is 1 in 12. So that basically we have doubled the share. Okay, we have a project at the Pew Research Center focusing the surveys at the globe, conducting surveys in the world, and they have asked questions related to aging. I'm only touching on a couple of them here. The first question is whether people have confidence in their standard of living in older age, and here's the result that the survey we conduct the survey in 21 countries around the world. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to look at it. So basically, the confidence level in the standard of living in older age is linked to how fast the country is aging and how well they do economically. And for example, if we look at the top, countries like China, Brazil, Nigeria, and South Africa, and Kenya, in these countries, people have higher confidence, and these countries also have relatively higher economic growth rate, and their aging is less of a problem. But at the bottom, you see Japan, Italy, and Russia, and in these countries, the opposite is happening. The other interesting question we asked is, who should bear the greatest responsibility for economic well-being of the elderly, whether it is themselves, their families, or the government? The result is a little mixed, but we see on the right-hand side, it's a green bar represent the government. In 11 out of those 21 countries that we surveyed, the government is a top choice for people, and they think the government should bear the greatest responsibility. And on the left, there are only 4 countries, which is the US, South Korea, Germany, and Britain are the 4 countries where the people think the elderly themselves should take the greatest responsibility for their economic well-being. And of course, there are other countries. In a lot of other countries, people feel that the family should play a role. Okay, my time is up. So here's a few recommendations, and I won't elaborate. But mostly it's about, the life expectancy, because people are living longer, and so that have implication to the retirement age. And also, when people live longer, that means they have more time to develop different kind of chronic disease, and then they will need more people to help them. So that's all for my time, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Wendy. You started by saying that there perhaps wasn't much policy in there, but I think we can see plenty of policy coming out of there. So one of my favorite family policies, and yes, that's the type of person I am, I have favorite family policy, is the Australian policy that allows, that facilitates grandparents officially caring for their grandchildren. Clarification question. Okay.
Do you have a data breakdown by male, female for different categories that you discussed, and also to do with socioeconomic background or not?
Sorry, I missed the first part. Which
For
slide
example,
you were talking?
data you have on who should be responsible. Do you have male, female breakdown, or socioeconomic background,
Okay.
rural, urban, any of these things?
I think it's possible to break it down by gender and other economic factors, but I got it from a report we already, I can check for you. Yeah, it is. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was a borderline content question. But great all the same. So we're going to move on now. You can see from Azitha's title that's very, very clearly linking policy issues with the health outcomes and things we were interested in SDG 3. Azitha Mokomani is Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology in the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and a repeat visitor to this forum. So welcome back again, Zitha.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and good afternoon to everyone. I'll just start. I think the first few slides in the presentation is basically basic information that most of you will know, but I'll say it nonetheless and then go straight into the recommendation why I want to spend more time there. Like Dominic was saying, work-family balance and health outcomes. I'll start with a little, first just brief definitions of work-family balance, which is the equilibrium achieved, not archived, to adequately reconcile demands of paid work and those in the family. And the converse of that is work-family conflict. If you don't achieve that reconciliation, you get work-family conflict. And it's usually bidirectional. It can be work demands interfering with family demands, or family demands interfering with work demands. We recognize that, but most of the time it's work-family conflict that is. And the major underlying thing there is the inter-role interference. If there is interference that is fair, that causes conflict, then it's an issue. Okay, thanks. So the literature is dominated by the conflict perspective, focusing more just on the conflict that occurs when you can't reach that reconciliation. But there have been recent calls also to appreciate that it's not neither either or. Work is not more important than family, and family is not necessarily more important than work. It's just there are also positives to us. But like I said, most of the time there is the conflict. And there are major reasons now, just socioeconomic and demographic changes that are leading to this. I won't go into that a lot. These are just some of the things, the changes that are coming, economic, demographic changes, the social context and things, and then the conflict that arises from that. Then the impact, there can be the impact on the family itself, on the work itself, but also on health. So I'll focus on health, which is the focus of this, this presentation. And what is health? The state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So work-family conflict impacts all aspects, not just necessarily one of them. The mental or psychological impact. It has also physical impact, dietary and lifestyle habits on child and adolescent health, and also on employers and the health system. So it's all encompassing. And based on that definition, I can say that it has a relationship to, it's specifically related to SDG 3 on just ensuring healthy lives, and also an aspect of SDG 2, improve nutrition. These are, I'll also go just quickly with that when you are facing that conflict, there is a high correlation between work-family conflict and depression, and I think it's very basic. When you are really tired and can't concentrate on depression, is always high levels of anxiety, irritability, and overall stress. And because of the gender, the social expectations for women taking more of the care work, there are obviously gender-based differences. Women are more likely to be to experience clinical diagnosis with mood disorders, and then while men are more likely to depend on drug and alcohol as a coping mechanism. Also, physical health outcomes, hypertension, collective migraines, and fatigue, and so on. I'll just go dietary habits and things. So when you can't do, what do? You don't have time. You have the fatigue, anxiety. You go for fast food, and you don't even walk into the fast food restaurant. You take the drive-through because you can't even walk there. So you don't even exercise to exercise. Also, has impact on family health, the relationship between family thing. When you can see that the fighting in the family is also related to that. Child health and survival. Okay, socioeconomic circumstances of children are related. We were talking this morning about child and maternal health issues, that it can be related to that, especially when childcare issues are there. So there is a wide evidence that parents' access to supportive workplace policies such as maternity, paternity, and parental leave can improve work-family balance. Flexible child arrangements, on-site childcare, and social improves infant and child health. Not just that, but also work-family balance for the parents involved. Adolescent health is just another thing. That poor work-family balance is also linked to various adolescent and youth health problems. That's about employers want to go. So where to go, we have to have work-family balance. But what I want to highlight is that one of the major policy gaps that is there in the work-family research and also policy throughout the world is just the lack of, I'm not sure if it's lack or maybe the context of developing countries is usually not taken into consideration. You see the policies I was talking about, workplace families are more or less assuming that there is an employer-employee relationship. But in most developing countries, there is a very high level of informality. Most people are working in the informal sector, especially women, more than 80% in Africa, in the 70s in South Asia, and so on. So it's also very important to. So even if you have those policies, they become irrelevant to developing countries. And research has shown that for women in those countries, provision of accessible and affordable childcare, that's the major issue, rather than family workplace policies. We're seeing in a presentation this morning that also a number of developing countries have maternity leave policies, but like I said, with high informality, doesn't make much difference. So I think in terms of policies, let's focus on the informalities, especially in developing countries. Because without childcare provision, people resort to solutions that also have an impact on health. Taking young children to work in hazardous environments, especially in the informal sector, is a common coping mechanism. Leaving them, taking older siblings out of school, and that also impacts on SDG 4. And it's very common. You take, and most of the time it's girls who are taken out of school to look after younger children, or just leaving children alone. And when I was talking about youth and adolescent problem behavior, that was happened. When schools ends at 1 o'clock, there's no aftercare, there's nothing. And what happens between 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock when there's no childcare? That's when children start experimenting with drugs, going to sexual activities and so on. There's also a need to extend that's the first one. The next one, I think there's a need to extend work-family policies to include care for other family members. Most of the time when you say work-family balance, we usually talk about sharing, and you see within workplace policies is maternity leave, parental leave, paternity leave. But care for older relatives is becoming such an issue now in developing countries. But I think also in developed countries, when we are saying that older people don't want to go into institutions. So in developing countries, it's not just they don't want to go, the institutions are not there in the first place. So even if they wanted, it's not there. And with a lot of migration of young people who traditionally will be looking after older people, is becoming an issue. Care for those who are sick. This became very evident in Africa during the peak of the HIV and AIDS, where it was people were working but still having to look after. And even if you are in the formal sector, taking leave to look after a sick relative or a sick family member was not part of the thing. So I think we have to also not just move away from children, but to other family members. We talked about this in the morning. The need for research is very important, just to give the evidence, because if the research and statistics, because policymakers are very difficult to convince unless you can do that. So for now, what has been happening is family issues as and thing people didn't take into consideration. So for you to get the ears of policymakers, you have to sneak it around other issues like HIV, like crime, like in South Africa, which has one of the highest violent crime rates in the world. Policymakers started listening about fatherhood, when the Institute of Security Studies started linking the levels of crime to fatherhood. So one of the major studies showed that 73% of inmates who were convicted of violence crime didn't have their fathers involved in this thing. So that's when people say, oh, okay, started looking. But with that statistics, nobody really cared. And now fatherhood is one of the major policy issues in South Africa. And then policy implementation also very important. We have beautiful policies, but if you don't implement them, what's the point? The African Union set in 1994 the African Policy Framework for Family Framework. Very beautiful recommendations there, and said, but about just before 2014, the midterm review, in 15 years review, showed that out of the 53 countries in Africa, only less than 10 had made family policies. And why? Because I think maybe let's talk about more binding policies or indicators so that we can bind people to report. There was no mechanism to a framework, have family policies. 15 years later, if you didn't have it, there were no comebacks. And then we can come here, sit, but if we are not following up, it's not that. Then finally, the partnerships between civil society and the private sector, I think is very important, especially when it comes to work-family balance, because most of the time, the workplace is where we start. And if the employers don't recognize the importance of this, we can sit and talk, but we have to engage them to do. And then in developing countries, civil society most of the time has helped play the role of providing childcare, and it has worked. So if we can strengthen that aspect, I think we are on the right way. Thank you.
Thank you, Caesar. Just on time. You know, it's a fascinating. The work-family balance is a sort of a very hot topic, very fascinating topic, and I haven't seen it linked to health so well. So that's really great. Any clarifying questions? Well, whilst with this meeting was starting, my son texted me, and he said, "Dad, I'm looking for a book," and I said, "I can't help, I'm in a meeting about facilitating fatherhood. So we'll hear a bit more about that from Scott. Thank you.
Wrote a book about fatherhood and got that constantly from my son. But anyway, I am an incredibly lucky and fortunate guy. And first off, I'm here, which is pretty amazing, right? But secondly, I feel so incredibly lucky because I was able to, when my son was born, that both my wife and I were able to be home for a significant chunk of time, and we adapted to life as parents together, and we both became competent parents, and both became confident parents, and we became confident in each other, and it has helped set up a dynamic in our household that I feel is unbelievably positive, and I see the ripple effects on my son's life and on my life, and part of why I advocate, and I've spent the last decade or so of my life advocating for the opportunity for, in particular, men who are providing for their families, or at least partially providing for their families, to also be enabled to be highly involved as fathers. Because I see that being able to do so and being supported in my desire to do so has led to so many benefits in my own life. And I really wish that all dads and moms, don't get me wrong, but I'm focusing on dads for today, can be both successful in their careers and be the highly involved parents they have always wanted to be. They can experience the joys of involved fatherhood, and that everyone can benefit from the benefits of involved fatherhood. So that's what I'm going to briefly talk about today. In preparation for today, I want to acknowledge Nathan Robbins, who is a doctoral student who assisted me in writing this paper and preparing this presentation. So I just want to say, go Nathan, thank you very much. I'm going to go relatively quickly, and I'm going to try to keep this a more personal, light note. But there's a library full of research that supports the notion that involved fatherhood is crucial for the development of healthy, well-functioning families. And I'm ever so briefly going to review some of the empirical research on the effects of involved fatherhood on the well-being of multiple stakeholders, the predictors to and barriers to paternal involvement, and how family supportive public policy and employer-based policy can better support fathers so that we all can benefit. So thank you. Okay, so there are many, many benefits of involved fatherhood. I'm just going to really go through these quickly, but there's, again, a whole lot of research that shows that children who are involved with their fathers in a meaningful way in their lives benefit psychologically, socially, with IQ, better health outcomes, better behavioral outcomes. Families are more economically stable. Children go to school more ready for school. Over time, they have lower getting into trouble rates, truancy, incarceration, etc. This is not to say that children without fathers around cannot be successful. Please, I'm not making any sort of implication there. There's many roads to successful children. But in almost every way, children can benefit from having involved fathers in their lives. They do. Women also benefit from having involved fathers in the family. Again, been linked to health outcomes. Also, in terms of women who have whose husbands or the fathers of their children are able to be involved in childcare and other activities, are more able to go back to work when and if they want to, and be able to contribute economically, both to their households and to their societies. So in terms of labor force participation and many other factors, women benefit when men are supported in their desire to become involved fathers. Economies and societies, there's research that shows that, again, when women are able to participate in the workforce more equally, this leads to great economic benefits for countries and societies. And it also leads to more gender equity in many aspects of society, such as government, boards of directors, etc. So economies and societies benefit. And most research on involved fatherhood stops there, which I always found kind of odd. But men themselves, and again, personally, I feel like I've benefited enormously from having the opportunity to be a highly involved father, but the research also shows this, that men themselves benefit psychologically. They report that they're much happier. They have fewer psychological problems if they are highly involved with their children's lives and have good relationships with their children. Health benefits, behavioral benefits. Men who are involved fathers are less likely to engage in very risky behaviors, drugs, alcohol, etc. They're more likely to know more of their neighbors, be more involved in their communities and in their religious organizations. They do better at work. In fact, there's some research that came out of Australia that they might live longer too. So there's a lot of benefits for men in terms of being able to be involved parents. Thanks. However, throughout the world, there are some barriers to increasing parental involvement. Now, of course, not all dads are good dads and want to be involved, but for the vast majority, we do. And several things get in the way. Gender roles that are, and cultural norms that either men contribute to their own, giving themselves certain roles that they will only do certain things, such as breadwinner only. And in fact, for low-income fathers and also for non-custodial fathers, so fathers who are not living with their children, being able to provide is often seen as a requirement for access through divorce courts or other aspects in society. Also, workplace expectations are often very much that men have to prove themselves, that they are always on, all in to work, and therefore, fully dedicated to providing for their family, even when they're trying to be more involved at home. Some public policy reinforces this, and also things like with the relationship with the mother of their children, and also sometimes gender roles are enacted both by the men and women, and sometimes women take the primary role as being the primary parent, and to some degree marginalize the role of a father in a family. Again, my wife and I were able to become parents together pretty equally. So since my wife was very confident in me as a parent, she didn't have to monitor me and do it my way and stuff like that, which sometimes gets in the way of dads becoming confident in doing parenting. And that's what's known as maternal gatekeeping. And then, so in terms of public policy, and we talked about some of this earlier on and in our prior presentation, actually, that parental leave policies can be very important here. And if we focus on paternal leave policies, only about half of the developed economies in the world have any sort of paid parental leave, and only 16 have more than 16 days of paid paternal leave. There's a discrepancy between what is offered to mothers and fathers, and there should be some, because there are this physical recovery component to leave that should lead to a discrepancy. But by and large, there can be more parity between what is being offered. Where we see paternity leave be more successful in terms of men taking more of it and using it is when there is father-only provisions, where it's use it or lose it. Quebec province in Canada and Portugal, I believe, both have policies in this way, where there's maternity leave and then there's paternity leave that you better use, or else it doesn't go back to the mom, you lose it. Some places partial wage replacements are really important when men are typically either breadwinners or co-breadwinners in a family. Wage replacements are very important. Other countries have an allocation of parental leave to a couple that could decide on their own how to allocate it through, and that tends to be very successful in making sure that men are taking a significant amount of leave. And then finally, just cultural expectations. In some places, paternal leave is offered, but it is not necessarily taken because of cultural norms. Much of my work in the business community has been to try to help businesses become more father-friendly. And the fact is, when companies become more flexible and provide for more maternity and paternity leave. This has benefits for families and for themselves as employers. In the U.S., when it is available in the United States, only about 15% of private employers have paid paternity leave. But when it's available, most dads do take the available few weeks of leave. However, there is still stigma against highly involved fathers in the workplace and against those who take extended parental leaves or use workplace flexibility such as flex time or telecommuting. And there's some evidence to show that men pay a similar price to what working women have faced for a long time when they're attuning both to work and family. So it's important that private businesses adopt better policy, much like it's important that we have public policy that is supportive of fathers, but we also need the cultural change behind it because just policy alone is not enough. We also need those other types of supports. So finally, my quick recommendations, again, both in the public policy and in the business sector, is more parity in the opportunity to become involved parents. And that's kind of the through line here. So that my wish would be that families around the world would be more enabled to arrange how they structure their family in the way that works for them, and they have the maximal choice in seeing this happen. And if that's a traditional arrangement, that's great. If it's a more egalitarian arrangement, that's great. But it would be wonderful, I think, if public policy and private sector policy can allow for more choice in how we operate as families. And finally, it'd be important that we recognize the benefit that involved fatherhood has to multiple stakeholders, and also that, listen, if I was unable to, because of my work or other constraints, if I was unable to play an important day-to-day role in my son's life, I would have a much less fulfilling life. And I really feel that sometimes if we get too concentrated into just what is expected of us in our gender role, it cuts all of us off from some of the rich rewards that we can have in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Any clarifications required, please, Anne-Marie?
Thank you very much for your presentation and your enthusiasm, which we were talking about. But I had two questions. Is there a minimum standard of being an involved father? First question. And the second one, did you have a look also at the fact if you gave more flexibility in the paternal leave policy, would it make fathers more taking up this parental leave? What's this point of your research?
Are these questions for later?
Thank you very much, Scott. They're excellent questions, and Scott, you can answer them, but we'll maybe just wait. Let's. Can we move on to the next presentation? It was the last in five, and I'm sure everybody's ready to get to the floor themselves. But our last speaker is Daryl Higgins. He's an associate professor and he's deputy director of research at the Australian Institute of Family Studies, which, by the way, is a most excellent institute and produces an awful lot of very good, high-quality output, and well worth a visit to their site. Daryl is going to speak to us about safe and supportive family environments and children's well-being. The floor's yours.
Thank you, Dominic, and greetings from down under. Everybody understands my accent. Is everyone following okay? Sorry. There we go. Greetings from down under. Hope everyone can understand my accent. Before I actually get to the substance of my presentation, spoiler alert, Game of Thrones fans know I'm not going to tell you what happens to Jon Snow, but I am going to tell you my policy recommendations now at the beginning, and we're then going to work backwards, and hopefully they'll explain why I think these things are important. I think from a policy perspective, what's important is being able to provide widely available supports for families in terms of what it actually means to parent effectively. And that can have positive impacts in terms of reducing child abuse and neglect. I think it also needs to be based on what we now call a public health model of child abuse and neglect prevention, family violence prevention, etc. And that means not just targeting those where there are high-risk indicators, but in fact trying to shift the whole population, so improving parenting practices right across the board, which will also shift those who are at the more risky end, so focusing our efforts at a whole of population level. To do that, though, means that we actually have to have systems of support to actually assist service providers in being able to identify, use and contribute back learnings on what we might call evidence-based interventions. Programs, policies, services that are actually doing what works in order to improve those outcomes for children and families. So that means we actually have to not only do more research, but do better with the research that we already have and make it accessible to policymakers. And for those of you who've worked in government circles, you'll know that a 200-page report is not what is going to be read by a minister or their advisor or even by a senior bureaucrat within a government department. So we have to actually do better at getting those messages out about what works and under what circumstances it might work. Ensuring that violence prevention, and of course that's really my argument, that to have safe and supportive family environments, we actually need to have a preventive focus. They all need to be underpinned by an overarching theoretical framework, or I'd call it a program logic, if you like, of what are the drivers of some of these problems that we actually need to be turning around. And all of the presentations that we've been hearing about today have been examining some of those. You know, gender inequality and stereotypes is just one of many of those drivers that leads to family violence, that leads to child abuse and neglect, and is likely to interrupt, therefore, a safe and supportive family environment for children to grow up in. And of course, those whole-of-government public health approaches need to be based on cross-disciplinary effective interventions. My other key message is really to make sure that we learn from past mistakes. And I'm going to give a few examples of some policy directions that in Australia we've actually had to not only turn around from, but publicly apologise for. But of course, to understand those, you actually need to understand a little bit about Australia and the context in which we're operating. And we were talking at this morning's meeting about the importance of that from a global perspective. It's actually very hard to have a one-size-fits-all. We actually need to be thinking about what our goals are, what our objectives are, and how we're going to move forward based on where we are right now. And across the globe, we're actually in very different places in relation to a whole heap of things. So we actually have to have some good data and analyse and think through those issues. So just to give you a bit of a snapshot for those of you who haven't been watching Neighbours on television. Brits love to watch Neighbours, but I don't know in other parts of the world. There have been some massive socio-demographic changes in Australia. Currently, we have had large increases in the number of lone parents who've never been married, unpartnered parents because of the rise in divorce, large rises in single-occupant households and couples living with no children as well. But one of the most remarkable has been, first of all, the number of marriages that are preceded by cohabitation. So about 4 out of 5 couples began living together before they became a registered marriage. The average age at which women are having their first child has risen. We have massive urbanisation, multiculturalism, ageing, growing numbers of families supporting someone with a disability, but also growing numbers of children receiving statutory child protection services. And of course, a low fertility rate. So that's some of the sort of background, if you like, to the Australian demography. In terms of the social policies that have sort of kept up or not with those changes, one of the big ones has been the introduction in 1975 of what we colloquially refer to as no-fault divorce. So being able to separate for a period of 12 months is the only requirement. You don't have to prove that there was any other reason than incompatibility as demonstrated through separation. So that then has led to a whole set of laws and practices around that, which were substantively updated and changed in 2006 when they were targeted more at supporting both parents having a role post-separation. So we're not, when we're talking about families, we're not just talking about families who are all living together. We're also recognising that a large number of families are subject to parental separation, and yet those family relationships still continue. Parents still need to be able to provide for the care and nurture of their children. We've also seen subsequent changes to those 2006 changes, which were focused around shared parental responsibility. However, there was some criticism that that actually opened things up to women and children in particular being exposed to family violence, because those arrangements didn't sufficiently account for the exposure of children within post-separation arrangements to ongoing exposure to basically their parents continuing to fight, and particularly for children to be exposed to physical abuse. And so 2012 saw even further changes focused on the safety and well-being of children in particular, but of women as well. And of course, as with many jurisdictions around the globe, seen not only the recognition of de facto relationships equivalent to marriage, but also of same-sex relationships being legally recognised. I got ahead of myself a little bit on some of those family law reforms here, but the other thing that I did want to talk about, and I alluded to it earlier, is that we've had a number of shameful policies in the past that governments in each of the states and territories and at the Commonwealth level, because we're a federation, have publicly apologised for, and that relates to practices of removing children from families because of the expectation that they're not going to be able to remain safely within the care of those families. They particularly related to our Indigenous population, so Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were forcibly removed from their parents and placed with white families, and that led to what we call a stolen generation. We've also seen very similar kind of practices in relation to what's known now as forced adoption. Again, where single unmarried mothers were discouraged from keeping their children, and many illegal practices went on in terms of them being forced to, not give up their children. They had no choice. The children were taken from them. And so we've had national apologies in relation to those things. Bearing in mind what I said before about context, the issue is that that influences our current policies around things like out-of-home care, compared to countries such as the US, where there's a very substantive push towards removal of children and placing them in adoptive families. That doesn't exist in Australia to the same degree, partly because of some of the history that we have around past mistakes. Again, because of our Commonwealth Federation, we have to work collaboratively across different levels of government, so the Commonwealth, the states and territories, and also with the not-for-profit sector who deliver many of the child and family services, to actually have a coherent framework in order to be able to focus on prevention of some of the harms that I was talking about before in terms of child abuse and neglect, etc. And so we have explicitly some frameworks around prevention of abuse of children and of violence against women and their children. And they're driven by those public health approaches that I was talking about before, addressing what are known drivers of those problems, particularly things like mental health, family violence and drug and alcohol misuse, and the socio determinants of that, such as gender inequality. One particular example, and you see the third point down there, is we currently have a major royal commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. And that's because of the significant numbers of children who have been abused in the care of organisations, including churches, including children's homes, in out-of-home care contexts, but also in sporting organisations and a range of other child-serving organisations. And that has really led to a strong focus within the national national framework for protecting Australia's children on what we call child-safe organisations. So again, taking that public health approach and learning from things like situational crime prevention to try and put in place systems of support so that it's not about trying to identify the one bad person, but actually changing the environment so that it's harder for anybody, be they bad, good or indifferent, to be able to get away with harming a child, and so that it becomes everybody's responsibility. And that involves not just policies at the formal level, but in fact changing the culture of organisations, and that really means changing the culture of whole communities in order to be able to support those objectives. Across all the different kind of policy objectives and programs that are put in place, there's a range of different ways for being able to monitor and track how those things are going. And I don't want to go into any details here other than to say that the significant work that Dominic was talking about that the Australian Institute of Family Studies has been doing over many years has been a key role for the Australian government in analysing the effectiveness of some of those policy changes, particularly the massive changes to the family law system that has occurred in 2006 and again in 2012. And it also means when we have programs implemented on the ground that we actually need to embed evaluations in those right from the beginning to be able to make sure that service providers who are delivering those services actually know what works and that they are choosing programs that are evidence-based. It's all very well to say we want to improve parenting skills, but if we're not actually using a program that's been evaluated and demonstrated to increase parental knowledge and actually produce positive outcomes for children, whether it be preventing child abuse and neglect or whether it be behavioural outcomes for children or cognitive or social outcomes for children, unless we're actually using those evidence-based programs, we're likely to be ineffective. And we then need to be able to share amongst each other those effective learnings. So, back to my policy recommendations. I'm not going to go over them in detail, but again, making sure that they're really occurring right across the board, widely available, and that there are supports put in place for those funding bodies that are actually putting in place these services so that we're actually having that learning loop in place and making sure that those effective practices are being shared. And as I said, my most significant message is really about adopting a public health approach and making sure that we're adopting those whole of system thinking and learning from past mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darryl. Plenty of food for thought and a real reminder to us all that this may be a single goal that we're aiming for, but we all start on different starting lines. Scott, can I ask you to address Anne-Marie's question whilst everyone else is thinking about the questions they would like to ask? Just put your hand up and I'll...
There was a two-part question, right? So first, is there a standard definition or something like that around involved fatherhood? And I'm not aware of a single standard definition. However, the research I've come across, most are self-reports about the number of hours or the amount of involvement, or how much child care or how things like that. There's also some studies that just talk about do you live with, do you do some child care, do you spend X number of hours with your children per week, whether you live with them or not. And those are some of the indicators that have been there. Secondly, flexibility in the family leave that's available. I think I'm just going to say yes, I support that. I didn't quite recall your full question for the second part.
Mark.
Yeah, well, again, yes, I mean, much of what I've been doing is working with companies who have implemented significant paternity leave policies, and now working with them to make sure that there's the supports within the organization, so bosses don't look like, hey, look down on a father who takes the paternity leave or gets them out of the loop or there's career consequences. So that's what I'm most focused on in my work right now is the policy is one thing, but then it's the support behind it, or the removal of barriers, I suppose, from it.
Okay, the floor is open. Is there any please. I see, and I've seen. Okay.
Thank you very much for the presentation. All of them were very informative and very informed and very useful in terms of what the work that we are doing. I have a couple of issues to do with aging, because the policy issues coming out of the discussion is very important for all of us because of the change in the demographic shift that is taking place. And I appreciate very much the data you presented, and I'm sure you have much more data to give us later on. So these are basically in addition to what you presented. One of them is the concept of aging. We have to be clear about that, actually unpack it, because aging is not marked by just by age, chronological factor of age, by the way, sorry. The chronology is one aspect of it, and we have other aspects of it, like the work that people do, the social background, gender, all of them changes our concept of aging. So we have to be clear about that in order to develop policies that are relevant to different groups. So you could have somebody who is 65 years of age chronologically, but very old because of the work that they do. And pension policies and early retirement have to take that into account, especially now that we want to postpone retirement age. This is one issue. The other one is to do with the speed of aging. In the developing countries, aging is taking place over a much shorter period. Over a 20, 30-year period, the number of elderly, the percentage of elderly is doubling up almost. Whereas in the richer country, it happened over 50, 80, 100 years on the back of a much richer social and economic background, which provided the country with better resources to manage the aging, like the European countries, or like Japan. So this is another important point, where developing countries are going through this process over a very short period of time without the economic and social infrastructure, and that is going to have very big implication for developing countries. We have to bear that in mind. And finally, the balance between personal, family, kinship, and social through the state. That is incredibly important, again, to get it right, because historically, the elderly were an important part of the poor people because they were poor when they were young. The change happened through the social policies of supporting the elderly. We have to bear that in mind again. If we shift things into the family, as we are trying to push it now in our discussion somehow, we have to be careful about that, because in 20, 30 years' time, it's coming to bite back.
We'll take all three questions, and if there's comments from the panel.
Thank you. Eve Sullivan, Parents Forum. I wonder whether I see that it is very difficult to sell parenting education as universal when it is presented as preventing all sorts of awful, awful things. If somebody says to me, I've got a great program, come over here, it'll keep you from murderizing your children, but I don't murderalize my children, I'm a good parent. I'm asking, how can we frame the needed parenting support in a positive way? That's my question. Thank you.
So much. My name is Irina. I'm from the Mission of Belarus, and maybe you know that Belarus is the coordinator of the group of Friends of the Family, but here I will speak on my national capacity. I would like to thank DESA and the panelists for this outstanding discussion, and indeed we have heard a lot of interesting information which we needed nowadays. We do understand that the family is very important and is a pivotal pillar in our human life, and is vital for all of us, because we all came from the family, and we do believe that we need to focus our efforts on promotion and protection of the family. We all know that all the tough debates what are going around the family nowadays. And needless to say that that the family is left behind in the new agenda for development just because of these debates. We understand that nowadays, in order to openly speak in support of the natural family, you should be courage, and now it is more a political issue than a social one. But we still do believe that we do right things, and we will promote the family, the concept of the family, which is envisaged in the United Nations documents. And we would like to take on board all the partners who would like to share our approaches. And we hope that DESA and the Secretariat also stand with us in the same boat. And DESA, in particular DESA, through the positive data collection on the family, because we have heard a lot of interesting information today, and I think that these data collection and data statistics can be very useful for DESA, for the Secretariat, to use in support of the family, because we do believe that the family is not the source of violence and crime. We have a lot of positive goods and social benefits from the family. And to conclude, I would like just to inform you that on the 17th of May, the group of friends in partnership with key civil society organizations will convene special high-level event on the family in order to mark the International Day of the Families. And on the 17th of May, we will open the thematic photo exhibition dedicated to the contribution of the family to the implementation of SDGs. We are all invited, and the announcement in the journal. Thank you so much.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Could I ask whether there's any comment from Wendy and Daryl on the first two questions?
Sure. I'll just quickly address the comment about aging policies, and I echo what you're saying about whose responsibility it is to take care of the elderly, and then whether the government should play a role. And as a family demographer, I see actually, it's not really realistic to count on the family or the individual themselves to really take care of themselves when it comes to time that they can't really take care of themselves. And especially in the whole context of family changes, and now we have smaller families, and we have fewer children, and also, with the divorce and remarriages, as I show in the chart, we might have more ties or family relationships, but these ties are weaker, and people don't feel obligated to provide help to their stepchildren or step-parent. So that will be an issue. Currently, the major source for help for the elderly in the United States is still from family, but whether we can continue to count on families to do the job, and the burden is falling on fewer people to do that, and that will be a challenge. Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah.
Can I just comment on the issue about positive supports for families, that it's not just about negatives. I think that that's a really important issue, that even though we might, from a behind-the-scenes policy perspective, recognise that there can be a number of outcomes for a range of different policy areas, like violence prevention, you wouldn't actually put that as the public face of a program by any means. In fact, quite the reverse, that you actually want to, as I mentioned, from a public health perspective, provide supports to everybody within the community, but with the opportunities to sort of ramp up the supports for those who might be having trouble. The other thing is that you need to be able to support help-seeking behaviour. So normalise the issue that you might be experiencing difficulties at some time or other. And a really interesting program that was developed in Melbourne in Australia was called What Were We Thinking? Targeted at young parents who, have their first child and they go, What were we thinking? So it normalises this, oh my goodness, we're in really deep, maybe we need a little bit of support. But it's offered to everybody, but it shows them how they can get some more of that, whether it's peer support or professional support or some learnings.
Thank you, Doug. We'll try and get in 2 more rounds of questions. We have 3 questions over here. So if you keep it nice and sharp and the answer sharp, we can get more people in. I've got you. No, sorry, excuse me. Sorry, we'll take these 3 questions here and then I will come back to you. Sorry. We have this gentleman here. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm speaking on behalf of Holt International. We have programs in family strengthening and children in adversity around the world. And we want to commend our key speakers for all the presentations. Of important note to us is the area of policy, practice, and research. We are speaking from the area of practice, and as practitioners, we will very much want to see how next year, for example, we might also contribute substantially to the forum. So there will be that nexus of what we're doing. Before we leave, we will also want to welcome any of our partners here who are interested in collaborating with us to translate all the good things that are being said and discussed here onto the field. We would want to see how best policy, research, and practice will be felt within the communities where the families, the father, as you rightly pointed out, the families live in the community. So we are calling for that collaboration, partnership, to be able to translate that. I want to thank you again for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's an excellent comment. I think in research we often kick implementation around like a football. We don't know what to do. And we have people in our midst who do it every day. So please.
UNICEF and now faculty at Yale Child Study Center. And also I'm a chair of Early Childhood Peace Consortium with the Secretariat at UNICEF. And it's a comment about, for example, you talked about goals, Dominique, and the sustainable and how they are interconnected. But sometimes we forget about goal 16, which is building peaceful societies, which is the nexus between development and the peace and security agenda. So what we are saying in our research and in our consortium, that families and investing in the early years of life and positive parenting can build peaceful societies, starting with the family, the community, and at large. So we want this, and your research is so wonderful and so good that you could influence also the policy of many UN organizations, such as UNHCR, UNICEF, and others. And why I am saying UNHCR also, because we have so many problems with refugees. We have 60 million people that are refugees. What do we do with the refugees? How can we keep the families together? And I want you to help us in this. And all the research that you have done can really help us in helping refugee families. Thank you.
Ignacio, please.
Very much to all of you for your presentations and for the moderation of Dominique too, keeping time. And well, I just wanted to briefly comment on Sita's presentation. When you work about work-family conflict, my impression, at least in the first world, is that that is usually provoked because there is a man-tailored labor market. We don't consider the possibility of a worker being a mother. That is the problem most of the time. And we can see in countries like France or Sweden that when we make this labor market more flexible, things work much better for everyone, as Scott was saying. And then addressing Eve's question, you know probably that I represent IFFD, that we basically organize parenting courses in 66 countries. And this is also prevention, okay? Reaching families that are not in conflict, that are not in a negative situation, a good way to avoid it too. So I would add, if I may, to her question, this reply. Let's try to be more active in preventing by reaching families in good situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Because this was the only comment of three, we will go straight on to the next two questions, and then we'll close. Unless anyone has something really pressing, we'll close.
First of all, I would like to thank all of you for the brilliant presentations, my dear fellows. Sorry. The issues on family and family wellness is a long-standing discussion. I'm opportuned to have been among many leaders of the world in the 90s across Europe, the prime ministers and presidents across Africa, America with Hillary Clinton. We discussed a lot on population and development, and I represented the International Relief Friendship Foundation of the United Nations. And today, I've worked for many years with the Universal Peace Federation. For many years, I've worked across the world, across Asia, Africa, America, South America, and leaders from these countries. The key question we have to answer today from the United Nations is, within the multilateral system of international organizations, within our different economic and political systems, what are the major macroeconomic instruments and institutions that impact family well-being to such a point that the micro units in various nations, in tiny communities, cannot stand up? This is the first and most important question that I see and foresee for the next 40, 50 years. And I would like the United Nations and all the delegates here present to take this question very seriously, at all the macroeconomic institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, the multilateral institutions. What is their impact on the family unit as a cell of our society, of our world? In that respect, I would like to implore all the delegates here to fervently push the United Nations to create an organ or an institution or a committee to oversee all the policies of the World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations, to see every single line impact on the family. And the second point I want to mention here is the spiritual aspect of family and development. In education, we say education and information does not equate goodwill. In other words, we say greed and goodwill does not automatically equate education and information. The United Nations and our learned friends here, we are not here just to inform people, but if we cannot influence people, societies, churches that control people and families, if we cannot influence traditional leaders, educators, spiritually, we cannot have an impact on the world. And the United Nations, on the fourth point, for the last decade, has worked on preventive diplomacy. Preventive diplomacy is very useful as a tool to bring about peace and the empowerment of families in any nation, in any part of the world. On the other hand, we have this group of capitalists and men who belong to secret societies, we all know, who impact communities, impact businesses, impact families. How do we go about educating people who don't know what is coming down their doorsteps? We're talking about family, we're talking about education, we're talking about marriage, we're talking about love, we're talking about parenting, we are talking about writing books, but we do not stop those macroeconomic political variables, business variables, spiritual variables that impact powerless families? Come on. So, to bring preventive diplomacy, it's better as an investment tool for the United Nations, for non-profit organizations, for civil society, for churches, for intellectuals, to bring peace to the families. You have to, first of all, bring peace to the families before you can even educate them. You have to, first of all, bring peace to a father and a mother before you can teach them about love, about raising kids. You have to bring peace to the environment before you can even bring people together. So I'm urging and pushing the United Nations and all the gentlemen and women seated here today to do all we can to bring peace, first of all, to bring preventive diplomacy, to bring the macroeconomic and environmental crucibles, the tools that we need to empower all families in the world, whether it's a black family, a white family, a yellow-skinned family, a blue family. That is what we need to do from the doorsteps of the United Nations. Thank you.
We have just, thank you for your patience. We had just one last intervention, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm Hassani from Mission of Iran, Consular Mission of Iran. First of all, I really appreciate DESA for organizing this wonderful event. Also, I really appreciate the panelists for their wonderful and excellent presentations. Mine is not a question, just a comment. First of all, on a personal note, I am very happy to attend this meeting to understand that gray hair doesn't mean to be old. And also, I think none of us should be considered old based on the findings of Ms. Wang. And that's great, good news. And on the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, we think that implementation of both 2030 Agenda and other development goals can be expedited and become, even economically speaking, more prudent through policies that promote the role and stance of the family in societies, especially should we intend to leave no one behind. This is very critical. Therefore, member states and UN bodies, including DESA, are expected to explore ideas in our understanding on harnessing potentials of the family as a critical player toward achieving sustainable development goals. We may also need to systematically measure and collect data on the economic loss that countries face or suffer because of exclusion of the family or its weakening in the society. By saying this comment, I really appreciate if we can have the indeed presentations of this meeting either on the website of DESA or being indeed forwarded to participants. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think unless I've missed a question hidden in the last comments, which I don't think I did, I think that we can happily close this meeting and say thank you very much to the panelists for their excellent contributions and to the questions from the floor and basically DESA and for everyone turning up today. So we're closing now. Thank you very much.